Today is April 21st, 2024. We are interviewing Vera Kremer. My name is Esther Finder. Ms. Kremer is in New York City, New York. I am in Henderson, Nevada, in the United States, and the language will be English. Today is April 21st, 2024. We are interviewing Vera Kremer. My name is Esther Finder. Ms. Kremer is in New City, New York. I am in Henderson, Nevada, in the United States, and the language will be English. Thank you for speaking with us today. How are you feeling?
Good, thank you.
Can you tell us what is your name and please spell it?
Vera Kremer. Verakremer.
What was your name at birth?
Vera Malkisha. My Hebrew name was Malke.
Could you spell that for us?
Verakmalkischer. My Hebrew name was Malke. My Hebrew name was Malke.
So your Hebrew name was Malka Malkisher?
Yes.
Okay. Where were you born and when?
In Vienna, Austria, January 27th, 1936.
And how old are you?
88.
What was your father's name?
Arthur Malkischer. His Hebrew name was Abraham.
Where was he born?
He was born in Vienna, Austria also.
What work did he do?
He was an orthopedic. Well, in Vienna, he had a liquor business.
What do you know about his family?
Well, his family, he was the oldest of three brothers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and a sister. And
her name?
The sister's name was Lucy. Her birth name was Hermina, but she called herself Lucy afterwards. Lucy Kobach, she was married. She got married in 1930.
Do you know how to spell her last name?
Yes, Kobak.
Had the family been in Vienna for many generations?
I don't know, for quite a number of generations. I would say, yeah, back in the 20s. But my grandparents were born in a different place, you know. They were born...
Where were they?
My grandparents were originally, my maternal grandmother was born in Czechoslovakia. And my paternal grandparents, I believe, were born in Poland, Lutz, Poland. But that was a long time ago, when they were little kids, children.
What was your mother's name?
Alice Malkischer. Her maiden name was Alice Fleischer.
I hate to ask again, but could you spell Fleischer?
Yes, Fleischer.
And where was she born?
In Vienna, Austria.
And what work did she do?
Well, she was in school till she got married, and then she was in the liquor business. Her family was also in the liquor business.
What do you know about her family?
Well, She had two brothers. She was the oldest, and I had two brothers. And my grandmother had three brothers also. My maternal grandmother had three brothers.
What religious traditions did your family observe?
They're Jewish.
What traditions did they observe? Were they religious?
No.
Were they secular?
My paternal grandparents were very religious, but my maternal side of the family was not that religious. They observed all the holidays and traditions, but they were not ultra religious, let's say that.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I have none. I'm an only child.
So you were an only child. When you were little, did you have a favorite holiday?
Yeah, Hanukkah. That's what all children like the best.
Why was that your favorite?
Well, because that's where you celebrate, and it's a happy holiday, and everybody gets gifts. So as a child, that was my favorite holiday, but not as an adult. It's not my favorite holiday. My favorite holiday as an adult is Passover, because I believe that's the most meaningful holiday in the Jewish religion.
Well, Passover starts tomorrow, so let me wish you a happy Passover.
Thank you.
What can you tell us about relationships between Jews and non-Jews in your childhood?
Well, in my childhood, most of my friends were Jewish, and they were in Shanghai, because my childhood was spent in Shanghai, China, and we all went to the same school, and most of the people were from Austria and Germany, so they were mostly Jewish.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a minute. We're going to get to China in a minute. Do you have any memories from Vienna as a child?
No, I was 2 years old when I left.
So you have no memory of the Anschluss or anything like that?
No.
When you think back to the time before you left Vienna, nothing sticks out in your mind at all? No childhood home?
No, only the stories that I was told by my parents. I really don't remember anything.
What prompted your parents' decision to leave Austria?
Well, my parents had a liquor business, and there was a Nazi collecting all their money, sitting there and collecting any money that came into the business. And we escaped on the high holy days.
What year was this?
In 1938.
So this was before Kristallnacht?
Just before Kristallnacht. But my families, many members of my family who came to China later, were there still for Kristallnacht.
What plans were made to get you and your family out of Vienna?
Well, the only place that did not require a visa was China at the time. So my family left, and they took the train to Trieste and caught the boat to China, the Conte Rosse. The name of the boat was the Conte Rosse, to China.
Who went with you?
My father and my mother, and I believe there might have been one or two relatives then on there, but I don't know who it was.
Who remained behind and why?
They came shortly after us. All the relatives came after us. My father's brothers and his sister came, and my grandmother and all my grandparents. My grandparents on my paternal side, and my grandmother, who was a widow at the time already, came to China. My maternal grandmother, and a couple of cousins also.
You left before Kristallnacht. What
Ja-
could you take with you?
Well, we weren't allowed to take very much, but we did take some gold that was sewn into my clothes and etc., out of Europe, because we weren't allowed to take much of anything. Very limited amount.
You mentioned that you took the ship. Can you tell me what the ship was like and who were the other passengers?
I don't know the other passengers because I was only 2 years old, but the ship was apparently, according to my parents, it was a very nice ship, and that the voyage was a good voyage. I don't know too much about that voyage. Only the voyage out of China I can tell you about, because then I remember everything. That's all I know. I know it was the Conte Rossa, and it was an Italian ship. So I don't know not much else about it.
As you have said, you were only 2.
I was
Do
2
you
years old, but
remember-
I was told that I fell into a bucket of water and they didn't have it changed for me. Because I was walking already. Yes, that's what I was told.
Do you have any memories of your first impression of Shanghai?
Oh, definitely remember first impression. Not when I arrived, but my first impressions, yes.
Please share them.
Okay, well, I do know that I do remember living in outside of the ghetto, and we had to move once we were interned into the other place. When the Japanese took over, we were interned and we had to move inside, and the conditions were very poor. Once I was interned, I had an outhouse. I never had a bathtub. I never saw a bathtub the whole time I lived in China. I never had a bathtub. We had a bucket of water, and our drinking water we had to boil, and it was all boiled on a coal stove. We had a little coal stove. There was no electricity like that or anything like that. The conditions were very, very poor. It was a very poor section. Once we were interned. Even when we were outside, I never had a bathtub. But I did have a flush toilet when we were living before we were interned. We had a flush toilet. But when we were interned, we lived in a place where I had to go downstairs to an outhouse. As a child, too, that I remember very well. Even if it was in the middle of the night, I had to get dressed because it was cold in the winter. It was cold in the winter and was very hot in the summer.
Can you tell us where you first settled before you were interned?
We first settled on Wayside Road, which was right outside of the thing, and it had a park across the street. There was a park across the street.
Do you remember the living conditions in that first place? Other than you had a flush toilet.
We were always in one room. We couldn't afford anything too much because we had we needed assistance, and food supply was not the best, and in that case. But when I was 5 years old, I started to go to school, which was founded by the Kaduris and the Sassoons. They were very wealthy people, and I started learning English when I was 5 years old. Before that, I spoke German, which we did in Austria and Germany. So I do speak both English and German.
Did you learn any Chinese?
No. The Chinese spoke in Pidgin English, or Pidgin German, what you might call. Like they had those things across their shoulder, and they were saying like things like Porzellan, which is porcelain, kaputti Ganzmacher. In other words, they fixed porcelain and things like that. The Chinese acclimated to us, but we had Chinese friends on the streets, and we played with them on the street. Children outside, downstairs. We played with other children, Chinese children outside. Yes. They were very friendly. We never had any problems with them, with the Chinese. There was no anti-Semitism, as far as I know, in China.
What was the Jewish community in Shanghai like when you arrived?
When I arrived, I don't know. Later on, I can tell you that they tried to make things like that in Europe. They had concerts. They had a theater. They had a coffee house, a Vienna coffee house, and they had a piano. And but that was basically for my parents, As children, we did things in the school, like plays and things like that, like you do here. Everything in school. As a child, you didn't have the problems that the parents went through, the Holocaust.
Can you explain that a little more?
Well, our parents were the thing, knew what was worrying them, and they were concerned about different things and trying to make a living and all that. But the children, we didn't have those problems. We just played our games and went to school and did all these other things. So and you had friends, and you went and you did everything. You went to other people's houses, the street, other people's houses, other people's places to live. Most people only had one room, and it was everything. It was everything. It was their bedroom, their living room, their kitchen. It was all in one room.
What about food and medical care in Shanghai?
Well, we tried to get food. Some food was hard to get. For instance, I never liked milk because the milk there was awful. It tasted awful. So my whole life I never liked milk. There's some things you couldn't get. You couldn't get meat. That was hard to get. But we had potatoes, and we made I remember my mother making like a schmaltz a spread with carrots and something else, camouflaging it. But we were not completely starved at any point. We had some food to get, but it wasn't always what we wanted to get.
And medical care?
In medical care, you had a place where you could go for medical care. If you needed it.
What about religious freedom and observing holidays in Shanghai?
You had all the religious freedom you wanted. There was a synagogue. There are 2 synagogues, I believe. But one synagogue is called the Ohel Synagogue, which is now used as a museum, and they try to keep some of the Jewish things that were going on at the time, and there is a certain area that can be visited, which is part of what the Jews in Shanghai went through. But a lot of the other parts were destroyed at the point. The poor section where I lived, that no longer exists, because I went back there as a reunion. We had lots of reunions everywhere, and we went back there in 2006. I went back to China as a reunion.
We can talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
Did you observe any holidays in Shanghai? Any
Yes.
Jewish holidays?
All of the Jewish holidays we observed.
How did your family support itself?
Well, they tried many different things. My father had an orthopedic shop, orthopedic technician. And before we were interned, he was in a different place on Peking Road, outside of the district. But then when we had to be interned, he had to move his business into the area where he was. So then he was on Tongshan Road there, which was not that's good an area. And it was hard for him to make a living. But my mother made bells. During the war, she made bells, braided bells. After the war was over and we were able to go to the outside, my mother was a sales girl. She was a sales lady in a PX and later on in a very nice Chinese store. That was after the war was over, after we were able to go in the outside again. But it was very hard during the war. It was hard to make money. That's why we could not move into a better place, because we didn't have the money.
A few moments ago, you had alluded to moving from one place to another.
Yes.
In China. Can you start from the beginning and walk us through some of the changes that you went through from when you first arrived to when the war started and how things evolved? Take me by the hand and walk me through.
Okay, well, as far as I can only remember is when I started school. And that was always very good. We had a very good education. We had gymnastics, and I had dancing for a while, and a few other things, and that continued. The school continued, was the same, but even when after we moved into the intern, but we had to live in that ghetto area when the Japanese took over, and it was very, very crowded. And like I said, I moved into a place where I had an outhouse, and the conditions were bad. But we still played with the same children and went to the same school. Okay, the school was actually in the area, in the internship area. That's all I remember at this point about it. I had friends. I had many, many friends, and when we had reunions here, I went to quite a few reunions. I also went to reunions of my husband. My husband was also a Holocaust survivor.
We can talk about him a little bit later too. Can you tell us about when Japan got involved? What other changes, besides you physically having to move, what other changes were instituted?
As far in my life, there were not too many changes, except for the fact that if you wanted to go outside of the district, you had to get permission from the Japanese. because they didn't want you to work outside or anything. They really didn't like it, unless it was an emergency. All I remember is I as a child, had an emergency. I was bitten by a dog, and I had to get 18 rabies shots. So my father had to get permission from the Japanese to go outside because the doctors were not there to help us with that. A Japanese doctor took care of it. My father took me every day with the rickshaw to get my shots outside there. And of course, that didn't hurt so much, but the cleaning out the wound, that hurt. I remember that as a child. That's one of the things. And I remember having different things. I did have measles, mumps. I had those things, and one of my she was an aunt of mine that was also in Shanghai. Like I said, there were more people there, and she came and played cards with me when I had the measles, and I remember those things. All these people are gone. A lot of them lived in San Francisco. That's where a lot of people also ended, in San Francisco. And but that's about it. I was in San Francisco for a few years too. Well, I'll tell you that later.
During your time in Shanghai, you kind of alluded to this a minute ago. In what ways did the Jewish community engage in self-help? How did Jews help each other in Shanghai?
Well, if you needed help, you can always go to what's called a Haim. It was an organization where a lot of people lived in that area that couldn't even afford to be in their own room, and they would help you. There was Jewish organizations called the Joint. Did you ever hear it? Yes. Okay, and there were many other organizations that would help you in that area, and they formed that place. You would also have to go there if you had an injury and you needed some help. They would help you. There was a hospital there, and one of my uncles was a male nurse in that hospital.
You talked about the schools that were there. Who organized the schools?
The schools were actually formed by two people who were very wealthy, the Kaduris and the Sassoons.
And who were they?
And they've been in China for many years. We're in the silk industry and a few other things. All I know is they became very, very wealthy. And they helped the Jewish people out. And also the Russian Jews that were there, that came to China in the 1920s, who helped us out originally with everything else. But our schools were separate from their schools. And like I said, our school was formed by most of the people from Shanghai lived there, that were teachers there, etc.
So the two families that set up the schools, were they Jewish families?
I believe so. I don't really know. I don't know. I don't know all that much about them, actually.
Is there anything else that stands out in your mind from the period of time before Pearl Harbor in Shanghai?
No, not that I can tell, that I mentioned.
How did things change then with Pearl Harbor?
Oh, yes. Once the Americans started bombing, they bombed China. Of course, we were rooting for the people, but we were hoping that we weren't getting hit. There one time when they hit the Hongqiu area, which our area was called the Hongqiu. But there were many people there. Of course, some of them died from cholera and different things, older people that I know of. No children that I know. And I still had friends, but the bombing did not hurt me. I was taking piano lessons for 4 months, and I could only take it in a cafe where there was one piano. And the bombs were falling one time, that I remember. And I continued playing the piano. It didn't faze me at all as a child. And the piano started hopping away with me. Would you believe this? Started hopping, and I was hopping with the piano. I only took
Because of the vibrations?
Yes, I only took the piano lessons for a very short time. You know,
Japan was allied with Nazi Germany. What pressures did the Germans try to impose
well,
on the Japanese to get to the Jews? Were you aware of anything?
Yes, I know about it. They tried to pressure the Japanese to do away with the Jews like they did, but the Japanese said they are our Jews and we will do what we want with them, and they would not listen to what the Germans wanted. They did not really bother us too much, at least not from my experience.
Do you have any insight into why the Japanese were not more receptive to what the Germans were saying? Why did they not bother the Jews? Do you have any idea what was
Well,
the
I
relationship
don't
between...
think that they were anti-Semitic in any way. I didn't find any anti-Semitism in China, or not before or after they took over. And they did not want to kill people. They did not want to do that.
Were there any other changes under Japanese rule besides having to get permission to leave the area? Were there any changes in food or shelter or...
Well, we couldn't get things as much, and we couldn't make a living as easily, and we couldn't get certain foods. I remember that meat or certain things we couldn't get. Once in a while we got chicken, okay? But things were very expensive. But the Jewish people set up a delicatessen in the area, so if you had money, you could get that stuff. Depends how well you are. And we had everything. We had delicatessens and cafe houses, even restaurants. They set up even restaurants in the area, in the poor area. But all of this is gone now. It's no longer existing.
When you look back to that time of your life, the war years in Shanghai, what would you like us to understand about what your life was like then?
Well, all I can say is you should never be forced to leave your country. You should never have to go through a Holocaust again. That's what I think for all future people. That's why it's so important to tell your story for future generations.
But what should we understand about what life was like for the Jews in Shanghai? For somebody like me who has never been, and what was the community like?
It was a complete cultural change for my parents. Totally different culture. They came from a beautiful city where they had a wonderful life and were completely uprooted and had to start all over which was a completely different way of life. It was very difficult for them. As a child, it didn't bother me, but for them it was, and I didn't even know the difference. I didn't know anything but China from the age I was till I left China. My whole childhood, that was there.
How much did the Jewish community in Shanghai know about what was happening to the Jews that were left behind under the Nazis?
Well, they didn't know until I remember that uh, until I was a little older, they had put up signs of people who are alive and who were killed. And I know that my grandmother lost her one of her brothers. One of her brothers was killed, and it just so happens from that grandmother. She had other brothers and things that a lot of them left and went into different parts of the world, and as a result of her brothers, I had lots of relatives all over the world now. And we even found in Czechoslovakia, there were graves there of the town that she was born in Třebíč, which is about half an hour away from Prague. My great grandparents' graves are there. There were no Jews living in that town, and one of those cousins, going 3 generations down, that lives in Vancouver, Canada, wrote a thick book about the family. We had a reunion in Prague. One reunion I went to, there were many from that family. I might have maybe 800 relatives that are gone already. They died because one was in Sweden. My mother had one in London, in France, and one in France is still living that I'm in touch with. My grandmother's maiden name was Spira. I'll go into that if you want it. And so I have history on my grandmother's side. On my father's side, I have no history because the 3 brothers were in Shanghai and a sister, but the grandparents died in Shanghai. My paternal grandparents died in Shanghai, and I only remember going to my grandmother on Friday nights, and my one cousin went on Saturday morning to her, visiting her, and I have a picture of her and me. She died when I was about 6 years old. So, and they buried her in Shanghai, but during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, they overturned everything, and the graves are no longer there. They built over those graves and things, and we don't know what happened to those graves anymore. They found some graves of people in Shanghai, but not my grandparents. It's gone.
I want to just get you to clarify one thing. You were talking about lists of people who had lived or who had died. Was this during the war or after the war?
My grandparents died before the war.
No, the lists. You mentioned lists of, I had asked you about.
Oh, the lists that they found of some, they had some lists there that were put up by, I don't know what organization. And that's how my grandmother found out that one of her brothers was killed. The others.
Was this during or after the war?
It was during the war. It was during the war. That was before the Japanese came before the Japanese came. I believe it was before the Japanese took over. The Japanese took over in 1943, I believe it was, in 43. At that time, I was 7 years old, all right? So I do remember a few little things because my grandmother I remember, and she died when I was 6.
Were you aware in Shanghai about the bombs going off in Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
No, we learned about that later.
When and how did you realize that the war in Europe was over? Because the war in Europe ended first. How did you find out about that?
The war in Europe, we knew that things were bad when we left, and my grandmother, who was there still at Kristallnacht, as well as my aunt, my one aunt, and my mother had 2 brothers, and one of them went to Israel. I'm sorry. One of them was able to go to the United States when we were in China, and the other brother was a member of the Hakoah, and he ended up in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So my mother had one brother in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and one brother in the United States. And she came after Kristallnacht. They came to the United States. They were able to come because his wife had relatives here in the United States. So they were able to get to the United States fast. We had applied for what I understand, to come to the United States. But it was taking too long. We never would have made it. So that's why we ended up going to China.
Can you explain what Hakoah was?
Hakoah,
you mentioned Hakoah. What
the
was
Hakoah? Hakoah was a soccer team that he was with. And he ended up living all his life in Argentina. I saw him once when we came to New York. He came from Argentina. I saw my uncle once. And I have one cousin there in Argentina. But in New York, my uncle that lived in New York, he had 4 children here. And so I have 4 cousins that are still living here. They're all younger than me. I'm the oldest now. And they're my only cousins left in the family. That's on my maternal side. On my paternal side, there's nobody left because the one cousin that was in Shanghai with me, my father's brother Isaac, they were all in Shanghai with us, my father's brothers. He passed away a year ago. He lived here in New York too. He was in Israel first, and he went to Israel 2 years before we left China. Went to Israel, was in the Israeli Navy, then came to the United States and was in the U.S. Army. And then he went to school and became an engineer, and he worked for IBM. And he had one son, and he lived here in New York, in the New York area.
Let's go back to Shanghai. What do you remember about the last few months of the war?
The last few months of the war? I only remember that when the war was over, that I remember distinctly. There was a big going on there, and the Americans came in with their trucks and gave us all Hershey chocolates. So I do remember that distinctly. Then I was only, let's see, how old was I when the war was over? In 1945. Yeah, I was 9 years old. All right.
What was the post-war period like in Shanghai? The Japanese are gone. What happened immediately after the Japanese left? Maybe even before the Americans came in?
Well, we were able to go anywhere in Shanghai for one. In 1948, my school disbanded because a lot of people left either for Israel, United States, Canada. We did not get our visa to get the United States. Even when we left on the General Gordon, we went to Canada first. That's what I'm trying to say. That's why I call my traveling suitcase. I have a thing here about my trip. I went to Canada first. We left on the. You want to have that story? We left on the General Gordon. No, you're not at that point.
I'm not there quite yet. You're a little faster than I am.
Okay.
So, just a little faster than I am. You started to allude to something that I wanted to ask you about. How did the Jewish community in Shanghai change starting in 1945 with the end of the war?
Well, first of all, after our big celebrations, everybody was thinking about where they're going to go because we were able to leave Shanghai. Where are we able to go? We couldn't all go to the United States. They wouldn't let us in. It took a long time still then to come to the United States. Some of them were able to come. There were quotas. They call it quotas. And the German quota was better than the Austrian quota. All right, I'm Austrian quota. They were always able to leave earlier. It was a better quota. And also it depended if you had family and what family you had and so forth and many other things. And you had to be in perfect health and you had to have make sure that you were not a burden to the United States. And now people come rolling in there where they don't even do anything, right? They can come in on the borders. Forget it. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I'm not going to even go into that. But anyway, what we had to go through to get here is another story. So we had to go to Canada first because the communists were there already when we left. I left very late. I left we left in November or September or November, I'm not sure, of 1949. And it was the last ship that General Gordon took out of Shanghai. And I had to change schools because my school was disbanded because most people left already. Like I said, my cousin went to Israel with his family, my father's brother. And my other uncle went to Australia. My youngest one, Jacob, went to Australia. Abraham Isaac, my father was Abraham. But my mother only wanted to go to the United States, not the pioneer country that Israel was, because she had her mother who left 2 years before us from Shanghai to go to her son. She was able to go to the United States 2 years before. She had her mother in New York and her brother in New York. So my mother only wanted to come here. So we had entrance to Canada. So we went to Canada. So the ship we went on stopped in Japan, Yokohama, and in Hong Kong, and we were able to get off in those places.
Okay, but again, you're running ahead of me. I'm not finished with Shanghai yet.
All right.
And you're already just a couple more questions about Shanghai. I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned that the communists were there, and then you just ran ahead. What happened?
Well, the communists only required. Are you there now? Something's happening.
Gonna stop the camera?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, we had an internet problem here. We're back. I would like you to tell me, please, about, you mentioned the communists came and then you changed the subject. Let's stay with the communists for a little bit. What was that like when they came in?
Well, they came in, but really, they didn't bother us too much. We saw there wasn't much of a commotion. They really took over very easily. There wasn't that much of a problem. And we were able to continue and go wherever we wanted. The only thing that they required, if we were to leave, is we needed to get three citizens to tell us that we do not owe any money to anybody, and that we had no problem leaving the country. That everything was clear. And I, as a child, went to get it from our tailor and from the guy who made different things, and I got it from different people, the shoemaker, and so forth. And I was able to do that, and I got the paper saying that everything was all right. But I had to go to another school for 9 months, from January to September. Yes, it's September 1949 is when we left. I went to another school, which was in the other area of town, but it was called the Shanghai Jewish School. And but I did have 4 months of Chinese, which I never had, because in my grade, the lower grades did not have to have Chinese or Japanese. But my cousin, who was 4 years older than I, almost 5 years older than I, he had all those languages in school. He's the one that went to Israel and was in the Israeli Navy. My one cousin who was in Shanghai with me, my one paternal cousin. And then he came to United States after, but I will explain that later, right? My school was terrific also. I had very good grades, and I got a very good report card from them when I left, when I told them I was leaving. So then we went on the boat. Do you want to continue that?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Thank you, but not yet. Was there any increase of things like anti-Semitism or anything like that under communism?
Not at the time that I know of, that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
So I realize that you were a baby when you lived under Nazi rule, but you lived under the Germans, the Japanese, and then the Chinese communists. Can you give us some insight into any of those kinds of living situations and how they might have been different for you?
No, the only thing that was different is when we had to move into the ghetto. And when the war was over, we could go out wherever we wanted, which was terrific at the time.
Anything about China that you haven't told us about that you would like to share?
All I know is that when everybody had really left and we were in China, at one time, for the first time, we took a trip China to a resort. It was a very nice resort. Then I remember that very distinctly, at a pagoda. And I understand that Shanghai Czech used to go there. That was a very nice resort. We went to a resort once before I left Shanghai. But most people were not aware of that anymore because they left. They had already left. And of course, the school I went to, it was very different. I kind of missed some of the friends that had left. There were very few people left when I was in China at that time. And at that time, I was already 12 years old.
One last question about China, and then we'll go on, okay? When you look back at all the years that you spent in China, how would you say you were treated by the Chinese people?
We were treated good by the Chinese people. They did not bother us that much in any way. It's just that we had to live in the poorest section, which were really the slums. It was really very bad air. But I did go to Hebrew school at one point. I went to Beit Yaakov. Yeah, when I was very young, when I was about 7 years old, when we were interned already in the slums. And it was not exactly how I lived at home. And you're very impressionable when you're 7 years old, you know. Like there, they didn't do much with the girls, okay? And they told us this is a sin and that's a sin. And then I went home to my mother and said, "You're a sinner, and I won't eat here anymore." And came Passover, I didn't want to go home. I stayed at that synagogue because they were Orthodox, and my mother certainly wasn't. Beit Yaakov is an Orthodox. They didn't have the others. So I went through Orthodox, Conservative, Reform. I went through everything in my life. All right, let's put it that way. But I did learn Yiddish there because I speak German, and Yiddish is very much like it. So I did pick up Yiddish, not Hebrew, but Yiddish.
Okay, now let's take the voyage out of China. Let's go step by step. You boarded the ship, and
I boarded the ship. The ship was called the General Gordon, and it was the last time they took the voyage out of China. They went to China a few times and took people back and forth. And it was in September 1949. And of course, we did not have clearance to come to the United States yet. So we stopped in Japan, in Yokohama, where we were able to get off and see part of Japan. And then we went to Hong Kong, which we saw. And from there on, we went to Hawaii. And my mother had tears in her eyes because they would not let us off in Hawaii because we were not going to the United States yet. We didn't have clearance to come to the United States. And from Hawaii, we went to San Francisco, ended up, which is our last stop, San Francisco. And in San Francisco, my aunt, my father's sister, was already in San Francisco. So they came aboard the ship with all kinds of cold cuts and things, and it was terrific. And they were in San Francisco. And of course, I loved it on the boat. And I was at the time 13 years old. When I left, I was 13. So it was, I enjoyed it. Everybody was seasick. I was not. No. Everybody really was seasick. And the ship accommodations were pretty good. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And that, now I know where I was going. But there I knew I was going. When I left Vienna, I was only 2 years old. I didn't know anything, you know. And I enjoyed the trip. And after that, we were taken by train all through Canada. We saw Vancouver and other areas. We took the train on the United States and all through Canada. So I did really see a lot. But my mother wanted to end up in Montreal only because she wanted to go to her mother and her brother who were in New York. So that was the closest place. And they came to visit us, my uncle and my grandmother. And I didn't see her since Shanghai, my grandmother. But my uncle and I didn't see at all. I never saw before. And my two cousins, the older boys, the third boy, and my aunt just had a baby, the third boy. She had the third boy. She wanted a girl. She did have a girl after that. But we were in the United States many years later. And they all live here. And I'm the closest to the girl, who is really closer in age to my daughter than to me. So I have 4 cousins. My uncle passed away when he was about 65, I think. But my aunt-in-law, she lived to be 101. The mother, she lived to be 101. She only passed away a few years ago. Okay, anyway. So she was in Vienna during Kristallnacht, but they came to the United States. So I have my 4 cousins here. And one of my grand cousins got married, and I went to the wedding. It's better than the different funerals. Her mother passed away. That was last year, a year ago. It's nice to see my 4 cousins once. So my daughter couldn't come. My granddaughter took me to the wedding. My granddaughter is now 27. So I have my 4 cousins here. That was the story. You want to tell me?
I wanted to ask you, again, you're running ahead of me just a little bit. What were your expectations of Canada, and what were your first impressions of Canada?
Well, Montreal is a very beautiful city. However, I was not happy there. I was new. I was an excellent student, but the French was crammed down my throat because it's English and French. And in the winter, it was cold and everything had steps. And I used to fly down those steps, I don't know how many times. But never mind that. I didn't like it in the school. I didn't have any friends, and I was new there. And the teacher didn't like the fact that I was a better student than the French people there. But I went to that school because it was within walking distance from where I lived. And it was a middle school, all right? It was middle school. I lived there a year and a little over a year when the papers came that we can enter the United States. So my teacher didn't want to let me go outside. She says, "You can't." I says, "But I have to leave." I was very upset at the time. So I went to her desk, put my books on her desk, and went to the principal's office and told him I had to leave, and I had the paper here that I had to leave. And he gave me a beautiful certification and report, and told me to leave. And when we came to New York, I had a wonderful reception. All the people, the kids were all so friendly. Well, first of all, everybody, we were put on the Lower East Side. The Lower East Side, my mother didn't like it. My mother liked Canada better. She didn't like it whatsoever. But I loved it. I had a wonderful time. Everybody was friendly. I had a lot of friends. First of all, I had a lot of Jewish people. When I was in Canada in school, I didn't have any but Jewish people. It was not a very Jewish school. That's okay. And I made friends so fast. But I was only here 4 months, and I graduated. They put me in another grade. I graduated junior high school after being in New York for 4 months. PS 188. And I lived on East 6th Street between B and C. And I liked it, and my mother absolutely hated it because that apartment was a horror. That apartment, she says, yeah, I almost lived better in China. Oh, I forgot to tell you one important thing about Montreal. The first thing about Montreal was the bathtub. The one thing I loved, I saw for the first time a bathtub. And I was in the bathtub for a whole day, 24 hours, and they couldn't get me out. That's one thing about Montreal I like. And also, I was in the foot of Montreal on St. Lawrence Street, and they had swings there. And it was a very pretty area, and I used to go on the swings there all by myself all the time. But in school, I was not happy in the school. I was a good student, but I wasn't happy in the school there. Anyway, but in New York, I was very happy, but my mother wasn't.
Let me ask you just one or two quick questions about Canada. Did you experience any anti-Semitism in Canada, or how were you treated?
I personally did not. I don't know if there was some, but I did not experience anything, and not at the time anyway.
You mentioned that you were the only Jewish student in this French school. That's why I was asking. Did you experience any anti-foreigner sentiment, either in Canada or in the United States?
No. The United States came later, after I left New York, I got to tell you that. They had some strange experiences, but that's another thing. In Canada, I did not feel that at all. No, I can only say I didn't like the winters, and I spent 2 winters there and 1 summer, and the school, because I didn't really have any friends there. Let's put it that way. That was one of my main reasons. I do remember one thing. I had one friend that came a little later from Shanghai, also Germany. She was a little older than me. I met her a couple of times in Canada. And she was also at the reunion that I once went, when Shanghai reunion later. Anyway, the two of us went because in Canada you could not go to the movies until you were 16. Okay, they had a very strict rule about the movies for children under 16. And so I got dressed up as if I was older. And she was older too, so able to go to the movies. The only kind of movies they had were children's movies, and I wasn't interested in those. Okay, I was 13 at the time. I'm going 14 at the time. All right, anyway. So that's one thing I did. And of course, the bathtub, that was one thing. We didn't have TV or anything, but I had a radio. Okay, I had a radio, so I listened to the radio a lot in Canada.
While you were in Canada, were you connected at all with any Jews or any other refugees, survivors?
Yeah, some people that came to Canada that were in Montreal from Shanghai. I know my mother met some friends from Shanghai. Yeah, and there was an old teacher that was in Shanghai that was also in Montreal at the time. But like I said, and that one girl I met was from Shanghai, and we were friends outside of class. But she just
What
came at
about
the end. At the
I'm
end
sorry.
in Canada, so what? I think I'm frozen again.
I can still hear you. It's okay. There you are. Did you meet any survivors, any Jewish survivors from Europe in Canada?
Yes, that one girl that I told you about, and my mother had some friends that were there. They were Jewish survivors from Canada, and the teacher that I had, he was a Jewish survivor. They were.
I'm just wondering what you might have heard from survivors from Europe of what they went through. Did you meet anybody that had gone through the war in Europe and come to either Canada or later to the United States?
The only ones I met were people that were survivors that were in Shanghai. That's the only ones I know about. There were other survivors that went to Montreal. Yes, there were other survivors that were in Montreal. My mother knew a couple of people that were survivors that spoke German also. You know, most of them that spoke German. When they used to speak German, and I didn't like it. When I was here in this country or anywhere else, I didn't like it that they spoke German. Okay.
Before you came to the United States, what were your expectations of America?
Well, I can tell you, expectations are usually the movies, I tell you that. The movies. And when I left Shanghai on the boat, I came with a book and movie screens that I had pasted in. I knew all the movie stars, all right? That was what I brought back. And the money at that time, the Shanghai money, I threw it overboard. Because I tell you, $1 was like 1,000 yen. You needed for $1 from $1 at that time, which is now, it was 1,000 yen. That's how much the dollar was worth at that time. And that the yen were nothing, so I threw them overboard. At that time. Now it's a different story.
So you shared with us your expectations of the United States. What were your first impressions of the United States when you got here?
Oh, I loved it. I just loved it. I was very happy to be here.
How did you adjust to school or social life or anything in the United States? Was it easier than Canada?
Oh, definitely it was easier than Canada to adjust. But like I said, I was in New York only 4 months and graduated junior high school. And then I left for San Francisco, California, because my mother wanted to go to San Francisco with my grandmother. My grandmother also came with us, okay, my mother's mother. My uncle stayed here. He lived here. And my mother was very happy in San Francisco. She found a very nice job as a sales lady. And I spent the summer still in New York with my grandmother and all. And then my grandmother and I took the train. I took the train again. I saw the United States many times, all the way to California. And I entered school in San Francisco. Of course, it was all new again. Now here I'll tell you about something very interesting. I met a gal who came from Germany. Okay, she was also brand new, and we became best friends. She was not Jewish, she was German. And we had something in common. We both spoke German and English, and we were new in the school. And we're best friends. And to this day, It is now, we're 88 years old. I'm still in touch with her. I call her once a week. She lives in San Francisco. And I went back to New York. Well, that's let me get finished with San Francisco. The school was very, very nice. I was very happy there. I was a cheerleader. I got involved, and everything else, and I enjoyed my life. Of course, there I was very mixed with between Jewish people and a lot of other people, and I had a lot of friends there. Like I said, mixed. In New York, it was mostly Jewish, old Jew, mostly. Lower East Side was very Jewish at that time. Anyway, so and our apartment was a horrible apartment. So my mother didn't like that. That's the apartment my aunt had gotten for me, probably because the rent. We couldn't pay such a high rent. We were not, we were new. At that time, things weren't handed to you now, like they give now everybody everything. It's a ridiculous thing. Anyway, so, but in San Francisco, my mother was a sales girl, and we did very, very well. And my father passed away. So that was the end of my dad.
When did he pass away?
In 19, I don't remember exactly, 62, I think it was. Something like that, yeah.
In San Francisco or in New York?
No, in New York. He passed away in New York.
I wanted to ask you what Jewish traditions you observed after the war when you came to the United States, in New York or in San Francisco. Did you still observe the way you did before?
Yes. I followed all Jewish traditions. We weren't kosher or anything like that, but the Jewish holidays and going to synagogue, yes. I didn't go regularly in San Francisco, no. My mother didn't go every Friday night to synagogue or anything like that, no. Here I do. I did. My husband and I did, because my husband came from a more religious family, okay, originally. And but we did not join when we moved to Pearl River, we joined the temple. We formed the temple in Pearl River, which was not a Jewish area. We were very involved in it, and I've been a member. We've been a member. I'm still a member there, 55 years. And I was bar mitzvah there. My children were bar mitzvah in the temple there, and confirmed, and even married, and named and married in the same temple, reformed. And that's where I learned all the Hebrew. That's where I learned all my Hebrew prayers, because it's English and we understand what's going on.
You mentioned your husband a moment ago. When and where did you meet him, and can you tell us?
Okay, well, I was in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco about 6 years. And then my cousin, who was went to Israel and was in the Israeli Navy, came to the United States, also was in the U.S. Army. And I wanted to see my cousin, whom I haven't seen since Shanghai, my one and only cousin, paternal cousin. So I came to New York for a visit on Labor Day in 1957. And there, they belonged to some sort of a club where a lot of the Jewish people met. And my husband was there too. He was a friend of his. And he was washing his car, etc., etc. And that's where I met my husband and quite a few other people. And that's where I met my husband and my cousin. And he was also going with a gal who was also a Holocaust survivor. My cousin was. Okay, and he got married 1 year before we did, in the same place in New York.
And was your husband also a survivor?
My husband was definitely a survivor, yes.
Can you share a little bit about his history?
Well, he was born in Yugoslavia, and he was smuggled. His father was taken away, and they found out later that he was killed. But he was smuggled into Italy as a girl because this woman lost her daughter and he was smuggled into Italy as a girl. And his family also came. His mother and brother also entered Italy, and so did his extended family. My mother-in-law's sister and her husband and their children, and also extended cousins of theirs. So, about 10 of us, of 10 of them, were traveling in Italy. And an Italian, a very nice Italian, gave him a card and said, "We have an abandoned synagogue and you can stay there." You know how the four corners, and they raised crops and they ate there and they lived there. In Rovigo, it's called Rovigo, I think, for a couple of years. And they gave him ration cards and everything. And then he came one day and said, "The Germans are coming here and you have to leave. But I have a brother living in the Vatican in Rome. You can make yourself you can all go to Rome, but don't use public transportation because the Germans will ask you for ID. You have to go without public." So they went with bicycles on whatever transportation they found and made their way to Rome. And my husband went to school there, and he lived in the Vatican with his one cousin who was about his age. The older once went to another different school, his brother and his other cousin. And they went to Vatican there. They were there a few years, and then President Roosevelt wanted to do something about getting the refugees in the United States. So they were the very first ones to come. The war was not over yet. In 1944, by Ruth Gruber, who was sent to get them. If familiar with Ruth Gruber, she wrote that book also, The Haven. That's the story of my husband, The Haven. The book is called The Haven. She wrote many other books. And we went to many reunions and to her birthday parties, Ruth Gruber's birthday parties, and the many reunions. When they were here, when they came to the States, she took them at the boat to the States, but 1,000 were allowed to come in, but only 800 came. Part of his family didn't want to come because they said that it's dangerous on the water because of the things that they're exploding now, and the war was not over yet, But some of them went to Brazil, of his family, and the rest came to the United States. Quite a few of them. The 10 of them that were traveling together, they all came to the United States. And they were interned in Oswego, New York, and Fort Ontario. And there is a museum there, and we had many reunions. I went with my husband. He went with my husband to his reunions, and he went to my reunions, Shanghai reunions. We went to a lot of reunions, and we saw the world this way. Anyway, and we went there, and they were interned there. But the people in Oswego were wonderful. After school, the teachers came into where they were interned. And they were in a fenced area, and in the United States was the first time they ever were in a fenced area. They were there, and the teachers came and taught them English, and after school they were very good to them. But the older kids, like my husband's brother and his cousin, there was a hole in the fence. They got out of the fence and went with the bicycles to New York. And ended up in New York in school, and they did a few other things. Nobody said anything, but they went out to school. His cousin became a dentist here, was a very famous dentist, and his brother became an engineer. They all did very well. Anyway, once they were out, I'm going to go back a little bit. Anyway, they had to sign a paper that when the war was over, they were going to leave. That's one of the other reasons why they were. So when Truman took over, Truman said, "I'm going to follow that. You can leave. We're going to take you to Canada, and you stay a day in Canada, and then you come back. So you fulfilled your reason, and then you can come and stay in the United States. You fulfilled that you had to leave, and then you can come and stay in the United States. Truman did that.
What was your husband's name?
William Kremer.
What did you and your husband do to support your family? What work did you do?
Well, my husband was a tool and die designer. So he worked there first as a tool and die designer. And I was a legal secretary. When we first got married, that's where we were, what we were doing. And we lived in New Jersey at the time. In a place, they had little veterans' homes. It was very pretty. So they're like little bit, and in the middle they had a nice lawn and all. And I worked in Hackensack, New Jersey. And after about 3 years, we bought a house. I had friends who lived in Orangeburg, New York, and we visited them. She was very involved in the Holocaust too, my friend. And we visited them, and then we bought a house in Pearl River. There was an opening in Pearl River where they had a showing of one of the houses they were building, a new development, and we went there and we decided to buy a house in Pearl River. So now I lived in Pearl River for 65 years. My husband passed away 3 years ago. All right, and after when we moved to Pearl River, my husband went into my daughter was my son was first born after we moved to Pearl River, and then 2 years later my daughter was born, and my husband had a bad back. And he was flat on his back, and my mother-in-law got married again for the third time. Her first husband, was a Holocaust survivor. Her second husband she met in Oswego, and he passed away. She got married again the third time. And he had a dry cleaning business. So my husband went into the dry cleaning business. And he went to school and he became the dry cleaner, and he was in the dry cleaning business. They had like 3 stores in New York or something. And that's what he did until he retired. And I continued. I was not a legal secretary after that. I was an administrative assistant, and I worked in many different areas. And at the end, for the last 20 years, I worked in New York State, right near me at Rockland Psychiatric Center, as an administrative secretary for the last 20 years.
Have you spoken publicly about your experiences?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
The first time both my husband and I spoke about both of our experiences was at the Holocaust Museum in Spring Valley. That was the first time that we both...
When?
Oh, that was a long time ago. It must have been maybe 30 years ago. That was a long time ago. Then I spoke at my temple to the Hebrew school kids, and also at one time at another time. And a few years back, my husband's still alive. Before I went, about 6 years ago, I spoke at a 55+ community where a few of my friends moved into. It was a brand new community. Moved there from Temple. Now I've been a member of that Bethlehem Temple for 55 years. So anyway, I spoke there. I spoke at another place once. I don't remember. A few times. Okay, that's about all I can say. And my suitcase which I'll tell you. I got the traveling suitcase. My suitcase is at I donated it to the museum, Spring Valley, and the museum is now in Rockland Community College. Okay, the whole museum. And I went there once and I saw that they don't have my suitcase, but they have a picture of my suitcase and my name on it, and also the story of my husband. But I don't know, because it had my maiden name, that they did not know that I was the same person as that suitcase there, because it had my maiden name on it, because that was the traveling suitcase has my maiden name, and I don't go anywhere with my maiden name. So I don't even know if the museum has my story, but they have my suitcase. I'm not sure about the story. Now, a few of my husband's cousins live in the Washington, D.C. area, including one of my niece for my husband's brother, the daughter. She lives in Arlington, and she comes and visits me quite often. And my husband's 2 children are my only niece and nephew, since I'm an only child. Yeah, my husband's brother. My husband's brother had Alzheimer's for the last 10 years. Before he passed away, way before he must be gone, was it 5 or 6 years? My husband is gone 3 years, yeah. So, I went back to Shanghai on a reunion in 2005. And it was a very, very nice experience. And they preserved the synagogue and a little part of our Shanghai Jewish things, so that any visitor coming to Shanghai can see that part, because a lot of people invested a lot of money into keeping that area. It's at the Ohel Synagogue, which became the museum. And I think my little report card is in that museum from the Beit Yaakov school. I'm not sure. But anyway, and that's all I can say. And then I went to see the rest of China, a little bit of the rest of China, which I never saw before.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Shanghailander community, the survivors from Shanghai, and how they stayed in touch all these years?
Well, we had a lot of reunions. I had one in California, one in Philadelphia that I recall that we went to. We didn't go to everything, but there were reunions all the time. They had a reunion in Israel too. I didn't go to that one. I was in Israel we were in Israel 3 times. The first time was in the 70s, when Bill's aunt and uncle, who were traveling with him to Oswego, decided to go to Israel, to live in Israel for a while. They're really from New York, but they decided to live in Israel. And we were there at that time. At that time was a more luxurious trip, because we stayed at the King David Hotel and all that. It was a very pretty trip. The next trip we took with our daughter and family with our temple. We went with our temple to Israel. And there we saw all the other areas, including the Holocaust there. And it was a very, very nice trip. My granddaughter was at that time almost 10 years old. And my husband was very excited to go and show her everything there. And then she was the youngest one of all the people there. And we were the oldest ones, my husband and I. I was turning 70 at the time. Then we went again with my son's family. My son married a Japanese girl, and he lives in Japan. And he has 2 boys, 2 sons, who are Jewish. They are more religious than my kids here that were here. My Japanese Jewish boys, they're also American citizens, because my son took him right to the embassy and they told them that they were Americans, so they both Japanese and American, the two boys. And they followed the Jewish religion. And the oldest one was studying in Israel at the Ben Gurion University for his master's in cyber technology. And he wanted to stay in Israel, and it was so hard to get a working visa. It took him a long time, and finally got it. And then the war broke out in Israel. That was just now. Then the war broke out in Israel. So we didn't want him to stay there. We were afraid. So he came back. Japan got him out, and he went back to Japan. So now he just accepted a position in Japan, but he wanted to work in Israel originally. So that's where he is now. And the younger one is in Japan also, and he's working also something with technology. And he's going with a girl from Australia. So I have an international family anyway. My other son lives in, my oldest one, I'm going to be a great grandmother in October. My oldest grandson lives in Florida. He's an attorney. And he just got married in November. In Florida. I couldn't go to the wedding because I can't leave here. I'm on dialysis 3 times a week. And I'm missing a leg, and I cannot go anywhere but in a wheelchair or in my bed. So I could not go to the wedding, but I had so many pictures and videos from it, and it was terrific. But they sent me all the pictures. So that was really nice. And my husband and I had a very good life in Pearl River. And Pearl River is not a Jewish area. And we had a synagogue there for 55 years. It was a terrific thing, you know. So, and actually, I said, I can only say that my life was really a good life, my life. And we want to make sure that our great children and grandchildren have that kind of life.
I wanted to ask you to reflect on some things that have happened more recently. I wanted to ask you your reaction to what happened with Ukraine, with the attack from Russia, and seeing the refugees and all of that. How did you react to that?
I think it's a terrible thing that they can't have peace in this world. You know, it's an awful thing. You should have peace. Why do people always attack them? What happened in Israel is the worst thing. They take them out of their places and abandon them. It's horrible. But I don't hear that on the news much. All I hear is about the poor Palestinians. What about what they originally happened? What originally happened? They didn't start the war. They didn't start the war with Palestine. It started after they attacked them on October 7 and took everybody out of there. Hundreds of hostages, and the rest of them are probably not alive anymore after 6 months. You know, where is it mentioned that the war was started by Hamas? Where is that mentioned? Do you see it on the news now? No, you only see the poor Palestinians. That is my reaction. My saying is, the reason it is so important to let people know about what happened in the Holocaust, it is definitely a must for any survivor to tell their story, to educate future generations, so it never happens again, to let them know what is happening, never to forget that, and to keep going with that. That is so important. It's the most important thing. I think it's so terrible. I think at this point, peace is the most important thing. Here, I'm wearing it. Shalom, peace. Peace. All stop wars. Somebody has to stop. Somebody has to stop somewhere. Otherwise, it'll continue forever. With the wars. Why? Why do people have to take off another country? Why are they happy with where they are? In Ukraine, for instance. Why? Why? Why is that important? Why does Hamas, why do we have terrorists? Why do people come and take people out of their homes and take them as hostages, babies and whole families? It's ridiculous. That's my opinion. Please make peace already. Stop all wars. Peace. Shalom. Peace.
Is there anything more about your personal history that we have not discussed that you want to talk about before we conclude?
Yeah. Do you want to see the pictures or documents?
We do that later. We'll do that after we finish the narrative.
Oh, okay. All right.
Is there anything we have not talked about that you want to share?
I only want to share that you need to educate people about the history of what happened to the Jewish people so that it never happens again. Never again. That's my entire fear. Peace. And I only hope for peace in the world.
That's your message for the future?
The next generation should be educated and continue telling the story about what has happened. I know I told the story to my children and my grandchildren. They know everything about that.
Do you have an additional message to future generations who will watch this tape 50 years or 100 years from now?
Just exactly what I said. Peace. Only peace. I only hope for peace in the world. And we all could get along with each other. There's no reason why other people shouldn't get along. Everybody wants the same thing. A good home, a nice life. Everybody in the world wants the same thing. And I only hope for that. I only hope that should happen, that we all have peace. A peaceful world.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
Can you tell us who are these people in this picture?
This is my paternal grandmother and me in Shanghai. She passed.
Names, please.
Her name is Kirla Malkischer.
And your name?
And the little girl is me.
Your name, please.
My name is Vera Malkischer at that point.
Okay, and when was it taken?
It was taken in Shanghai when I was about 3 or 4. I don't remember exactly. So it was in 1941 or 42, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
No.
You wanted to add something about this picture?
Yes, it was taken in about 1939 or 1940 in Shanghai.
Okay, thank you. And tell us about this picture, please.
This is a picture of my father and his 2 brothers. My father is in the middle, Abraham, and his other brother, Isaac, and the younger one, Jacob.
And last name?
The last name was Malkischer.
Okay, and when and where was it taken?
Oh, this was taken long ago. I really don't know. I think it was taken in Vienna. I believe it was taken in Vienna.
Okay, thank you.
Please
tell us about this picture.
This is a picture of me in school in Shanghai. Where the arrow is, that's me. That's a picture of me in school in Shanghai.
And your name?
My name is Vera Malkischer.
And you said it was taken in Shanghai. Do you know when it was taken?
I would say it was taken maybe in 1942 or something like that.
During the war.
Or 43, I'm not sure.
Thank you.
One.
Can you tell us what we're looking at now?
Yes, these pictures were taken of me in Shanghai, and the other one on the right is me and my mother, and the one on the left was a little older, was in Shanghai also.
Okay, your name, please.
Vera Malkischer at that time.
Okay, and your mother's name?
Alice Fleischer.
And
Oh,
when
I'm
was
sorry,
the picture-
Alice Malkischer. Her name is Alice Malkischer. Fleischer was her
married
maiden name.
Yes. When was the picture taken of you with your mother?
The one with my mother was, I believe, in 1943.
In Shanghai.
Yes.
And the other picture, when was that taken?
That was taken in 1945, I believe.
In Shanghai.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. What is this?
This is the traveling suitcase. The suitcase is located in the museum, in the Holocaust Museum in Spring Valley. Originally, I gave it to them. And it's the traveling suitcase, which I found in the attic. And that suitcase came from Vienna and went from Vienna to Shanghai, and from Shanghai to Montreal. I'm traveling to San Francisco first on the troop ship General Gordon in September 1949, and went to and ended up in San Francisco. And from San Francisco, it went to Montreal, Canada. We went to Montreal, Canada by train in 1949 to 1951. In 1951, I went from Canada to United States to New York. I lived on East 6th Street between B and C. And from there, I went in 1951 to San Francisco, California, and entered high school there. And then I went back for a visit to New York in September 1957. That's the story. And I stayed, and then I married my husband in 1959. And that's the story of the traveling suitcase.
Is this the cover of a book or a booklet? What exactly is this that we're looking at?
It is actually the cover of a booklet that tells where I've been in the different places and has the documents of the different places.
Okay, and I have to ask you again, your name and when this was created.
I found it in the attic in 2006. In the attic of my home in Pearl River, New York.
And is your name, I can't really read it, is your name on there?
And at that time, I had this traveling suitcase. It's Vera Malkischer. My name is Vera Malkischer.
Thank you. What are we looking at now?
This is part of what's in the traveling suitcase. And what you see there, the picture is a picture of my father, my mother, and me. It's a document. And next to it is a document to leave Vienna. When we were leaving Vienna. It's called the Reisepass. It's in German.
I cannot read what's on there. Does it have your names on there and the
Yes,
date?
it has the name of my father and my mother and me.
And it has a date stamp on it?
No, I don't see the date stamp on it, actually. No, I don't see the date stamp on
So
But-
when do you think you got that paper?
it. That was actually taken in Shanghai. I believe it was taken in Shanghai.
Oh, I was asking about the pass to get out.
It's my father and my mother and me. And you want to have the names?
Please.
My father, Arthur Malkisher, which is Abraham is the Hebrew name, and my mother is Alice Malkisher, and me, Vera Malkisher.
Thank you. Okay, what are we looking at now?
On the upper right hand side is a picture of my mother as a little girl. That was taken in Vienna.
And her name, please?
At that time, it was Alice Fleischer.
And do you have any idea when it was taken?
She was born in 1911, so that was taken maybe 1917, something like that.
Okay. Go on, please.
The next picture is my mother and her two brothers in Vienna. The girl on the right is my mother, and the boy in the middle is my uncle, her younger brother, and the other one is her older brother.
And their names, please?
My mother's name is Alice Fleischer, and the younger one is Harry Fleischer, and the older one is Willie Fleischer.
And do you know when it was taken or where?
In Vienna. It was taken in Vienna, and she was about, I would say 1920.
Next.
That one is a picture of my mother as a young lady.
Is that lower right or lower left?
The lower left.
Thank you. And again, I have to ask the name and when and where it was taken.
And that was taken in Vienna, and I think it was taken in 1930 or 32, something like that. 1932.
And the name?
Alice Fleischer.
Okay.
She got married on February 14th, 1932, actually, in Vienna. That synagogue where she got married is called in the Seitenstraße, still exists. It's one of the few that exists between it because it's in a street in between other shops. And in order to destroy that, they would have to destroy the whole other shops. So that's why it still exists now, and they do have tours in there too. Because I was in it when I was in Vienna. Took a tour of that.
Okay. And did you want to share anything more with this set of pictures?
Yes, the other one on the right is my grandmother. My maternal grandmother, my mother's mother. And
her name?
Her name is Hedwig Fleischer.
And do you know when and where it was taken?
Yes, it was taken in New York when she came to the United States in New York. And I believe it was taken in 1950 or 1949, 1950, I would say, around then.
Thank you. What are we looking at?
You're looking at the wedding picture of my parents. And
Can you give us their names?
Alice Fleischer and Arthur Malkischer.
And when and where was this taken, or were these taken?
They were taken in Vienna on February 14th, 1932, at the synagogue on Seitenstraße. which still exists to this day, the synagogue.
Thank you. Who are these people?
This was taken at a reunion in Shanghai in 2006. And these are all people from Shanghai in the top row. And my husband is next to me. I'm in the middle on the back there. And on the bottom are the daughters, the children of my friend, well, one of my friends, and the other two are children of another friend.
Would you like to share the names of, well, I need you to identify yourself and your husband, but would you like to share the other names too?
Well, some of them, I don't know all of them. Okay, I don't know the children's names, the girls' names, not all of them. Okay, this was taken in front of the museum in Shanghai, China, when we had our reunion. And on all the way on the left, the gentleman, his name is Marcel Spiegler. He was a friend of ours. He's gone. He's passed away. And the lady next to me, I don't know, she's a friend of someone else. And the next person is my husband, William Kremer. And the next person in front is me, Vera Kremer. And the next person is Helen. She was from Shanghai too. I don't know her husband. Her husband probably took the picture. He's not in the picture. But I don't know her last name now. Helen. And the next one, she was from Shanghai, is Erica. I forgot it. I don't know her last name. And the other one is her husband, Erica's husband. All these people are gone. I'm the only survivor on that row. All these people passed away already. I'm the only survivor on that row. The girls underneath is the one on the right, extreme right with the pink shirt. That's Barbara Spiegler. She's his daughter, Marcel's daughter. And the other two are Helen's daughters. I don't know their names. They lived in Montreal. Barbara Spiegler, I'm still in touch with. She runs the Holocaust Museum in Tallahassee, Florida.
What year was this taken?
In 2006.
Thank you. And tell us about this picture.
This is a picture of my daughter's family and my husband and myself. It was taken at the assisted living when I would say about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago.
Can you identify who these people are? Can you give us their names, please?
All the way on the left is my oldest grandson. His name is Jeremy Sokol. And my daughter is next to him. Her name is Audrey Sokol. And next to her is my granddaughter, Stephanie Sokol. And then it's my son-in-law, David Sokol.
And seated?
I'm sorry?
And seated? Who is seated?
And underneath that is my husband, sitting my husband on the left side.
His name?
William Kremer. And I'm next to him, Vera Kremer.
And do you know what year this was taken?
Let's see, it's not 25. I would say 2018.
And was it taken in New York?
It was taken in actually Orangeburg, New York. That's where the assisted living is.
Thank you.
On the border of Pearl River.
Thank you. And please tell us about this picture.
This is a picture of my oldest grandson, Jeremy Sokol's wedding day to Samantha Donahue. It's Samantha Donahue. There's a picture there in the middle. It's my grandson's wedding. And the person all the way on the left is my son-in-law, David Sokol. And next to it is my daughter, Audrey Sokol. And then the next one's the bride, Samantha Donahue. And next to him is Jeremy Sokol. And next to my grandson is my granddaughter, Stephanie Sokol. And next to Stephanie Sokol is her boyfriend, and that's Drew Schweitzer.
And when and where was this taken?
The picture was taken in Florida at their wedding in November 2023.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And this now concludes the interview.
And I'm going to be a great grandmother in October. She's expecting a baby.